Welcome to our live event today. We are doing a table topper that is in our gemstone series, and it's not quite the last because it seems like I have had some requests for some other combinations. So hang on to your seats. We might be going a little further into the gemstone series, but today is Turquoise Twist. I'm Colleen Tauke, and I'm your instructor for this video. So our event today is going to be dealing with fabric selection, because what really comes down to making a good patchwork a lot of times has to do with the fabrics that we select and the textures that we choose to put into our patchwork. So we're going to focus on that. We're going to talk about the technique, and then we're going to talk about some of the quilting that may inspire you to practice a little further, maybe on your domestic machine than you have in the past. So make sure that you pop into the comments below the video here and let us know where you're watching from. If you have any other gemstones that you are curious about, maybe I can throw those into the queue and for future projects, but we've covered a lot of them, and we will review the ones that are out there. If you haven't seen, if this is the first time you're watching, let us know this is the first time you've joined. If you're a returner, we love to see your name also pop into the comments. And let me know if you've made one of them, made your interpretation of one of the gemstone toppers. It's always fun to see how other quilters take an idea, make it their own, and make an original. So I love to see your versions also. So remember to share those on our Facebook page. So when we get into Turquoise Twist, your pattern, of course, is in the comment section. There's a link there so that you can download the pattern. There's always a section, if you've already downloaded and have the pattern at hand, the back page is always there for taking notes. And one thing that this pattern does include is the ability to make the multiple half square triangle methods. There are two included. We're only going to use one in this project today, but how to use that technique in future other projects that you may be working on, so that it will have that chart and those tables so that you can then use this technique going forward. So we've got Catherine saying hello from Minnesota. Hello from up to our friends up north. Corinne says hello from Raleigh, North Carolina. Michelle is watching from Ludington. I'm not sure. Michigan, I believe, is MI, if I remember my states and abbreviations. Faye says good morning from Pennsylvania. And we've got someone on YouTube saying hello from Switzerland. That is fabulous. We love to have our international quilters watching also, because quilting isn't just an American phenomenon by any means. Quilting reaches around the globe and touches all of us. It's a way for us to be creative. I liken it to being a painter. I would never be a painter. I really enjoy paintings, but when I work with paint, it all runs together. But when I work with fabric, all the colors stay in place. So that's what's really nice to me, is this is my palette. When I cut my pieces and put them back together, the color stays put. Those who paint can make wonderful combinations by putting color together and then blending. And I have to use fabric to blend. So that's why we're going to talk about fabric selection and texture to include in your project. We got Dottie saying hello from Florida. Would like them to be larger for a charity quilt. How? I'm trying to think. I don't think that I have submitted it as a project yet, but I did make a bigger version. So because these are made with all half square triangles, it's very easy to enlarge it, to make it larger overall by increasing just the individual units. So you could use that table that's in the back of the project and back of the pattern to reference how big the half square triangles would be, and then figuring 6 by 6, because that's or 8 by 8, that's the layout for this project. I'm sorry, I have to remember what size the project is. 8 by 8, how big the overall project would grow to be by using the table and the chart in the back. Just increasing the size of the units makes the overall project larger. and all the math would be in there. You'd have to figure out your yardage, how many of each piece you need, and multiply some of that out. But it is possible to do this, any of the gemstones, into a larger throw. It will be square because of the dimensions I'm using. 8 by 8 makes a square project, but it could be made into a larger quilt if you want to go that direction. We've got Anya saying hello from sunny Minnesota. Cookie saying hello from Lovettville, Virginia. And a comment from our Canadian, a first-time watcher from Saskatchewan. Wonderful. We are glad that you're here. We have a lot of Canadian quilters, and we are so glad that you join us. Yvonne says, happy to be here from St. Paul, Minnesota. Very first visit. Yay. Remember that usually I come every other week. We're here for a live event just about every other week. And we do smaller projects. Once in a while, we do a larger project, but we teach you techniques, tips, tools, things to make your patchwork experience more fun. And we have a ton of free patterns. So spread the word if you have other quilters that you're learning with. Deb says, good morning from Texas. Kelly says, hello from Arizona. And we've got Danny. So that seems to be just like the Emerald Eyes table topper. Yes, it is an 8 by 8 layout. It uses half square triangles, but each of the gemstones has a different layout so that each one has its own personality. And the quilting is different, each one, trying to inspire you to expand those quilting skills, learn to use different number of lights, darks, and mediums, because we don't always use 3. In this project, we're using 4. I think in the Amethyst Amore, I think there's 6 fabrics, trying to stretch using learning to grade 8 values so that you get the same kind of dimension within your project. So yes, they are similar, but the layout in every one of them is different. Been having a lot of fun sorting through the different possibilities. Esther says hello from the Netherlands. We are glad you're here. And Teresa says good morning from Spring. I can't read the first word. It's in Florida. First time watcher. Wonderful. We're glad you're here. Okay, so the pattern. The QR code is up. You can follow the link to get the pattern later if you'd like, but just follow along for now. The Turquoise Twist, here we go. The whole project stretched out so you can see. This one has kind of a zigzag pattern around the outer edge. And when I do a step back, as I look into the camera, I notice that it's got kind of a arrows out from the center kind of effect here. So each one of these has a different pattern, a different thing that your eye will jump to as you step back from the design. And in this project, we're using 4 fabrics. We're using a very, very light fabric, and this one is an aqua. All of these are in that aqua turquoisey color, a very, very light fabric. One of these, it looks like it has a running stitch, a little bit of kind of a thread mark across it. I fell in love with this as a background because I wanted something super light. Then I found a fabric that it's in the light range, but it has a little bit of speckle of metallic gold, a darker turquoise. Well, that fit perfect for the next step. Then I happen to be over in the Tula section of fabrics. And if you have never used the Tula Designers fabric, this is, I'm trying to remember, it's like a landscape map. I can't remember offhand now. I can't remember the name of this one. And I don't know if I have enough salvage left. It's from it's called Mineral. It's from the True Colors line. It looks like a topographical map. So it has that medium, but it has some of the dark turquoise in there also. So that became the third piece. And I've got a confession to make. You know, when you start to work on projects and you find inspiration fabrics, you just buy chunks and you don't always plan ahead of how much you're going to use of anything. And sometimes you make mistakes. Well, here's my mistake. I bought this wonderful dark turquoise fabric, and I made a cutting mistake and a piecing mistake while I was at a retreat and not concentrating on what I was supposed to be doing, and made the wrong combination of pieces. So in order for you to even see the fabric, other than that which was in the quilt, the dark turquoise, all I have left is some oops triangles from my mistake. So if you think I'm a perfect quilter, you've got another thing coming. So in order to have all 4 steps, I kind of wanted that darkest turquoise to kind of really pop out, to be the loudest crayon in the box, and everything else I wanted to have to be steps into light, medium, or how did I label it? Let's see here. Yep, a light, a medium light, a medium, and a dark. So I have all 4, but this one happens to be the loudest so that it jumps out the most when you look at the project. So when working on projects, sometimes you have to buy enough in advance just in case you make a cutting mistake. And all of our patterns, when I write patterns, I usually always include for at least another 1 or 2 cuts, because you never know when you're going to make an oops. So you will have a little fabric, just not excessive. So when it comes to this project, some of the other in the gemstone series have squares within the design. And this one uses all triangles. There are no squares in this project. So it's a little bit different. So you don't have a pass on a few squares. And because this is basically, if you were to take this and cut it into quadrants, you're making a quarter at a time. There's always four of everything. And so I could use the 8 at a time method, and I didn't have to use any of the 2 at a time method in this project. So we're only going to use the 8 at a time triangle square method. It does not include instructions for 2 at a time, because we're efficiently using up everything on the 8 at a time method here. So the supplies we're going to need, besides fabric, make sure you have a good sharp rotary cutter, a marking tool of your choice. Remember, this is going to be marking on the back side of fabric. I tend to use a friction pen because I can see it very easily. It works quickly, but there are a lot of different choices for marking tools out there. But again, this is on the back side of fabric. We're good there. And then a marking tool, if you are not overly confident in where your 1/4 inch seam is, you might want to use a 1/4 inch seam marker. And I put those as optional because there are other ways to do it. But let's just talk about the tools that we can use to make our piecing look really great. Omnigrid puts out one that is clear. It has a yellow line down the center. Then there is one called a 1/4 inch seam marker that's a blue that's out there. These are the 2 that I know of that are a little bit longer because we need them to get across an 8-inch square of fabric. So these are the 2 that I would pick from, probably the most commonly. Let's see. We have Kimberly also saying hello from Newfoundland, Canada. We are reaching around the globe. I love this. And Kelly says, love your jacket. Well, in the Midwest, we're still trying to hang on to a little bit of cool weather. So I broke out something nice and warm this morning, and it has a little turquoise in it. So let's get started on the cutting instructions, because we're going to do all of the 8 at a time method. The only size you need to cut in this project is the 8-inch square. So just follow along with your fabrics down through the cutting instructions, and it will tell you how many of each that you need to cut. And so it's nice and easy doing all the same cutting, other than the 2.5-inch binding strips that you will use at the very finish of your project. Now, when I started this kind of series, I decided let's figure out a way to kind of streamline it. So I came up with an idea of kind of putting together a recipe. We're giving each of the fabrics a number, 1 through 4 in this case, and then giving you a kind of which ones to mate up to do this process. So there's a checklist of putting together fabric 1 and 4, which is the lightest and the darkest. And you're going to do that 3 times, 3 sets like that of putting those 2 fabrics together. It will tell you how many half square triangles you will end up yielding from that, and that's 24. And you're going to call those all A. So make sure that you either use a Post-it note, a baggie system, somehow, if you're going to be completing the project right away, you'll maybe just put a Post-it note on your cutting mat and lay them out A, B, C. If you're going to be waiting a bit, maybe that Ziploc baggie method might be a good idea to slip them inside to keep everything organized. Then you're going to use fabric 2 and 3, which we will do in our demo. And you're going to do that 4 times. So you keep kind of a repeat of the process. You're going to make 32 half square triangles in that color combination, called those B. Then you're going to use fabric 3 and 4, which would be this and my darkest fabric. And you're going to do that just 1 time. And that makes 8. And you're going to name those letter C. So you keep A, B, and C together, or in their respective piles. And then later you're going to use that so that you can lay them out in the proper order. Or you can follow the picture. Some people are better at using ABCs. Others are very visual and they like to see pictures. So we always have the diagram with a label. So you can be either of those learners or types of quilters. Now, when you put together your 2 fabrics, to do the 8 at a time method, you're going to be marking the back side of at least one of these 2 fabrics. Sometimes it just comes down to which one is the lightest on the back that's easiest for you to see. And if you're using a solid fabric that's been yarn dyed, there isn't really a right or wrong side because it's woven in that color. But in this case, the lightest one happens to be the medium fabric. So we're going to use our 1/4" seam marker, and we're going to mark diagonally across the block so that we lay the tool so that the center line of this tool lines up at the corner of one side and then go diagonally across the block. And we're going to mark on both sides of the tool. Now, if you're super confident in where your 1/4" seam is, you can make just a diagonal line, one line across the block, and then you can stitch 1/4 inch away from that line. But not everybody has that confidence yet. And sometimes we just want mindless sewing. And mindless sewing means we can just stitch right on the line and not have to worry so much about where our 1/4 inch seam is actually located. So you decide which is the most comfortable for you. If you're new to quilting, I, for years, marked everything and just used the lines. So there is no shame in marking to use that as your stitching line. Later, when I kind of got really, really confident of where I was going to be at, I could use just that one line down the center or diagonally across, but there's nothing wrong with having a little training wheel to learn our skill and hone our skills. Now we're putting right sides together. Make sure that you do right sides together, or you're going to be using a seam ripper to take your pieces apart. You need right sides together, and if you're a pinner, you can place a couple of pins so that your pieces don't slide apart. Best to always pin in the area where your sewing machine doesn't travel. So in those bigger triangle areas, or even just 2 to hold it in place. And then we're going to do that stitch down those lines so that, and if you want to worry about, if you're worrying about scant 1/4 inch, don't at this point, because these are oversized just slightly so that we can trim them down to be precise. If you do not like trimming, the chart in the back does give you the exact size if you don't like to trim. Everybody has a preference. Some don't mind trimming, others do. I find that I'm not always super diligent about my pressing, and I get a little bit of distortion at times. So if I have the ability to trim my pieces down, my patchwork will be very, very exact, and I don't have to work quite so hard at it. So by oversizing just a tiny bit, we can then create patchwork that is really, really sweet when we're done. Now, down one side, back across the other. The whole idea of using that line to stitch on really gives you time, if you're a beginner, to start or hone your skills of maneuvering the fabric under the machine. At first, we tend to oversteer or overdrive, just like when we learn to drive on the road. So it is kind of nice to have that line. And there's, like I said, there's no shame in using that line for stitching. That's why the tools were created, so that we could all do patchwork that looks fabulous. And you stitch the marked lines in both directions. I'm using a bit of a spider here, a little piece of fabric under my machine. This machine doesn't really like jumping into nothing. It tends to make a thread nest. So if I come off a little piece of fabric right into my patchwork piecing, then I have a little bit nicer and neater, and I don't have to worry about long tails in my, or messy tails on my quilting or on patchwork. So I've now stitched in both directions. You can see I've used red thread. See, there we go. X across it in both directions. Then let's get the iron hot. One thing that a lot of quilters will do is kind of skip the pressing part until later because they want to just keep sewing. And if you want to sit down and do all of the sewing at once, there's nothing wrong with that. But make sure that you get up and press before you start cutting this apart, because it really does make for a little bit neater patchwork, and it's easier to lay the ruler on there exact when it's nice and flat. When you sew across fabric, it tends to get a little bit of a warp to it, and that will flatten out your fabrics and allow you to do a nice clean cut when we cut this apart. The quilt behind me is a project from years ago that I did. I collected every pink fabric I could find, and I had no idea what I was going to make with it, but I know I love pink fabrics, so I decided just collect pink in either fat quarters, quarter yard pieces, and then figure it out later. And this ended up being the inspiration. I did all, I believe, 2.5-inch strips, and then did flippy corners on 2 sides with a white with a pink background. And then it was to figure out how to put it together. Sometimes we come up with, I like this fabric, and then we have to figure out a plan for it later. So that is a project from quite a few years ago. Okay, now that we have this pressed, we're going to go back and we're going to do a cut on it. So we're going to cut diagonally, both directions, but we're also going to cut vertically and horizontally. And in order to do that without moving our pieces around, a rotating mat, and this poor guy has been around for a long time. It's what you get a lot of uses out of the things we purchase. So a rotating mat will help us be able to cut always from a comfortable position and not do a angled kind of back at ourselves. So this is an 8-inch square. We're going to cut it first across down the middle. So 4 inches in. And if I line up the 4-inch line on the outside of my square, the outer edge of my ruler should be going right through the X's of my threads. So this is the first cut. Whoops. And then we're going to rotate and do the same thing in the opposite direction. And drop the ruler on there. Cut again. So now we've made it into quadrants. Now we have 2 more cuts to make, and that's the diagonal. So we're going to cut one direction. And if it's not absolutely perfect, that's okay. Remember, the stitching has already been done. So the piecing's done. We don't want to nick into our seam line, but this is just cutting our pieces apart so that we can open them up and have 8 matching half square triangles. By making them in batches, it's much quicker than making 2 at a time, or the traditional method. Our great-grandmothers may have just absolutely cut triangles and put those together. Voila! They would have had a lot more fun if they'd have learned this method eons ago, but they didn't have this yet. So we are glad that they hung around doing those ideas and patterns for us, but we've kind of made them a little bit faster. Okay, now that we have the triangles put together, we need to press them. And we're going to press these toward the darker fabric. And usually when I'm working on this, I'm going to make sure I pull this in so the camera can catch it good. Oops. As I'm working on these, I heat set it first, which means just drop the iron on the piece as a triangle, then open it up and nudge the seam allowance toward the darker fabric. And then I leave that piece in place and pick up the next one, do the same. And then the ironing board is really actually doing some of the work for me because the surface is also warm. And I know there are people out there who like to use the wool pressing mat, but at this point, it seems quite efficient just to put one on top of the other and open them up so that I get all of my pieces pressed kind of in overlapping mode, one after the other, until I get kind of close to the edge of my ironing board, and then I start on a new stack. Just give it a good press. Okay, now when we're done pressing all of the pieces, then it's time to do the cleanup cut on our pieces. You can use the rotating mat if you like. We're going to do all 4 sides to give them a nice clean cut, because we have dog ears in 2 spots and we kind of need those out of the way when we go to lay out our entire project. So by laying that down on the mat and taking a ruler that has the 45-degree line, we are going to be trimming all of these to 3.5. Now, if keeping that 3.5 in your head is tough, or if you're going to be walking away and coming back, you can use what's called glow line tape to mark your ruler so that you remember, yes, I'm at the 3.5 line. That's what I'm going to be trimming my blocks down to. Or you can use a Post-it note, painter's tape, something to give you a reference for the size. And the 45-degree line is going to lay on the diagonal of the piece that you just put together, making sure that you have the ruler on top of fabric all the way around. You're just going to take a little tiny bit off so that we aren't wasting any fabric. I'm not a big fan of throwing away a lot of fabric because fabric is expensive. I just want my patchwork to be as precise as possible so that when I go to put my pieces together, I have that accuracy. I know where everything is and it will lay flat when I'm done. So we have perfect patchwork and literally just some little tiny shreds to throw away. So no excessive waste here, but we'll have perfect patchwork when we have all of our pieces done. And yes, I know that's 64 half square triangles that need to be trimmed, but put on some great music, listen to a great podcast, and it'll be done in no time flat. Okay, once you have all of your pieces ready to go, then it's time to arrange them. And I told you, if you're a visual person, I have a diagram so that those who are visual learners have no problem knowing which way to turn. If you're an ABCs kind of person, then the ABCs are also listed on there so that you know you have things turned in the right direction. It's very easy to pick up a half square triangle, put it down, say, yep, that's B, but is B turned properly? So that you should always step back from a project, even use the camera on your phone to take a picture, because it gives you perspective as you step back to see if the design actually flows through the quilt, because symmetry is kind of the thing in these projects. Maria asks, what am I using for an ironing pad? This is a travel pad. It has a cutting mat on the other side. And when it's closed, it has a handle on the top. And it can go with me for video. It can go with me to retreats, to classes. But I just folded the cutting portion back because I need a little bit more space to cut here. And the ironing pad works great. It's a very firm pressing surface, which works really great. Sometimes we get a little too much cushion. Even the wool pressing mats are quite firm. And so they do their work. They're helping us from the other side as we press our patchwork pieces. So this just happens to be a travel mat, cutting mat, pressing mat combination. And I've just folded it back to use one side of it in my videos. So when you are working on Turquoise Twist. Let's bring it out. Always step back, like I said, making sure that pieces are positioned properly. On the outside, I literally was going in my head, making sure there's like a mountain peaks all the way around the outside, making sure that the light was always to the corner, on the outside corners, the light to this in the center, making sure it's together. The medium fabric kind of does an echo behind that so that it was ready to put my pieces together. Now, in the pressing process, I usually try to give you as much direction on which direction to press seams as possible. And I believe we've talked about in the past, seams to the right, seams to the left, seams to the right, seams to the left. That works most of the time. There are times when maybe a seam is going the wrong direction, and if it's been pressed once, does not mean it's the end of the road. You can always take that piece, that unit, back to the ironing surface, fold it back up flat. So if I had pressed it the direction I want it to maybe go the other direction, the seam allowance on the back, you can take this back to the iron. You can press it flat, and you can always do what I call corrective pressing. There's always that last chance to change the direction of the seam allowance if it's advantageous as you're putting your pieces together. So realize that if someone said press to the dark, it's not set in stone. There's no quilt police going to arrest you for switching the seam allowance to the other side. Do what works best for you in the end. Now, the last thing that I wanted to cover was we did all our texture. We talked about having that the textures and the variations from the lightest to the darkest. But I want to talk just a little bit about quilting, because these are small projects. These are really great places for you to practice your machine quilting on the domestic machine. Now, if it's a big quilt, I'm going to be honest with you, I take it to my long arm, which is in the next room, and I do it there. I don't do big quilts on my domestic machine. Just never got the skill down and had the opportunity to purchase one used. But on small projects, this is the place where you can hone your skills really well. And I'm hoping that these kinds of projects give you that freedom and the confidence to try and do some of that kind of quilting yourself on the domestic machine. Stepping out, trying something maybe different. Always remember to go in and kind of put the bones into your project. Do some ditch stitching. It's not a cop-out. It holds things in place as you do the rest of your quilting. And it tends to create stronger, straighter lines within your quilt if you do that ditch stitching first. I have a question. The small project is a great place to practice. Exactly. And I will show you on the back that I did my ditch stitching through here. And you'll see the darker thread, maybe, hopefully, making a big 9 patch squares on the back so that you can kind of tell where I did my, put the bones, the structure into my project. I wanted everything to stay nice and lined up straight. So I did kind of a split of the 9 patch here, here, and here. So we have 9 little windows then to quilt within. And then I went back and played with ideas. Sometimes it's good to maybe take a picture and print it out onto paper where you can doodle, or if you have an iPad or something that you can doodle on. I decided that some straight lines, good place to practice. You can use your machine's walking foot. I did straight lines in channels. I didn't use double needle, and some people will ask, well, why not? Double needle on your machine kind of does a zigzag on the back side of the quilt, and I don't want that. So I had to do the twin needle look side by side, once around and then go 1/8 of an inch to one side and go around. So all of the straight lines, I echoed the very center here. So I made this like a big box. And then I liked that look. So I decided, well, I can incorporate those 2 pieces together in my quilting, the dark and the medium. So the dark and the medium run out here as a zigzag and follow that channel all the way around. And that would quilt up a lot of my space. And then I decided, well, I like that channel look. The center is light. What to do with that? It doesn't have a lot of pattern in that fabric. So a micro stipple worked really great for holding down the areas that were light and letting those darker pieces kind of float up. So micro stipple, I think the camera, yep, you can see the texture on the light piece here. The micro stipple is in all the light sections. So that did most everything in the quilt top, except for the areas where the medium light fabric was living. And I couldn't figure out, what do I need to do? I need something there because it was just so boring. And then I thought, well, how about some lines going outward, change directions a little, almost like a beadboard kind of look. So our piano key kind of look. So you can see in those areas where I just channeled straight lines towards the center. You don't always have to put curved lines into your quilting. Sometimes straight lines used properly can add a lot of interest. And so that these oppose the angle. And then I also did that same thing on the interior with that same color fabric. Now, there are some areas that aren't quilted. It's okay to leave some pieces not quilted, as long as you ditch stitch so that they don't have wobbly edges. And so the pieces here don't have any quilting per se on those. It's just stitched around the dark and the ditch stitch around the medium fabric there. And then ended with a dark binding to kind of stop the eye. It says, this is the edge of the project. And the last question I used to always ask people was, what did you put in the back? And I carried over the turquoise to the back. I had bought this fun rosebud fabric, it has a turquoise background with little pink flowers. And it just seemed like it was meant to be the back of this quilt, somehow tying the turquoise to the back, but having a little fun. And then you can see some of the quilting on the back, but most of the quilting kind of just blends into the fabric. So Turquoise Twist is complete. Let's see. Didn't see any other questions pop up. If you happen to have a question, you can pop in there still and put it in. I usually go back at the later in the day and answering questions and say hello to everyone. We have one left in this series. Well, one official one. There might be a couple more that might just happen to pop into this series too. But in April, our company is its 10th anniversary. So I've come up with an anniversary topper to kind of put the grand finale on the gemstone series, but there are possibilities of maybe a garnet or an opal popping up later. So we'll see if fabric selection allows for those to also come in. And I'm also thinking about the holidays, and we've got already a Christmas and a let's see, Christmas and Halloween topper. And so I may run with those and have a little bit of fun having some gemstone holidays. So we will see you in 2 weeks. We are so glad that you joined us. Our quilt community, it has so much fun sharing ideas and enthusiasm for the quilt world. Thanks for joining me.